Oh, hello there. Yes, well, good grief. Managed to catch up with some sleep at the weekend, so we're into day 3 of, well, not doing very much work, so I'm kind of feeling vaguely human. You'll be, well, some of you not particularly pleased to hear. Never mind that now. I thought today we'd just have a bit of a laugh or a giggle or a bit of a snigger at James Esses, who appears to be everywhere on my Twitter feed and in other places as well. But, well, he posted this up. Right? The Debating Society of the University of Leeds have refused to host me for a debate on the topic of gender ideology on the basis that it would undermine marginalised groups' sovereignty and that I am an unsuitable speaker. Free speech is dying. Yes, it's awful that free speech is dying. Imagine a sort of vaguely democratic body like, somewhere that's got a president does suggest that, it's sort of things that people have voted for and they vote not to have you there because certain people don't want you there. It would be awful, wouldn't it? It'd be awful if you're a James and you can't go somewhere and just annoy people by your mere presence. Yes, free speech is dying. So, yes, I thought, well, isn't free speech dying? It's bad when free speech dies. So I thought we'd have a look through the past week of James's Twitter feed and see if we can find any other examples of free speech dying, because he's very keen on free speech. It's James, very keen on free speech, particularly with James, just slightly lesser with, well, everybody else really. So let's dive in, shall we? Leaving aside student unions, you know how bad they are with their democratic group of people with degrees. Sure, yeah. Anyway, so from just a couple of days ago, Dear Mayor of London, writes James. Firstly, why are these posters still up in Victoria Station? It's October. Secondly, and more importantly, why are you pushing false narratives that rights are being stripped away more and more with each year that passes? Stop the scaremongering. Yeah, you see, you mustn't put up, posters in terms of giving out bits of information to people which some of them might disagree with. Yes, now some people might think that was a bit of a free speech issue in terms of sometimes you have to be presented with things you don't like, but James is exactly right. Why should he have to put up with things he doesn't want to look at on the London Underground? Dreadful. Yes, I feel very much the same way about white tiles. Anyway, moving on from that, as we all know, he's very heavily invested with Matt Goodwin now. Matt Goodwin, a man that never knowingly passes up an opportunity to point out how bad brown people are, and they've got together to also point out how bad, well, pretty much everybody that isn't brown is as well. So here we go. Next week, I'll be publishing an article on mermaids, including original screenshots from their online chat rooms of their dodgy dealings. It's important that the public knows what this charity has been doing. Yes, indeed. Imagine, right, that there you are, right, on a chat room, just having, a kind of, chat in a kind of open forum, a kind of, where you're just having speech that's sort of, fairly free. It's a sort of free speech thing. But, there's a good chance that James will be there, in the shadows taking notes, because you mustn't write things in places about things that he doesn't like. It's a free speech issue. We all know that, free speech is dying. We wouldn't want to, some sort of police person who, is going to go around anonymously, just basically, noting down what people say in spaces that they feel are quite safe. That would be bad, wouldn't it? Apparently. Anyway, moving on from there, obviously, and tying in with the whole Matt Goodwin style vibe. Here we go. Okay, we got these two again from just a few days ago. If I went to an African country and used terms like anti-blackness or black fragility, I would rightly be banged up in jail or deported. Keep that one hanging for a moment. Yet there are individuals in the UK who speak of anti-whiteness and white fragility, and they're given senior roles in the NHS. Yes! And then a bit later on, the same sort of thing in terms of somebody replying to him. Reminder, having relationships with and marrying men is not inevitable. Other options available and generally better, which James thinks is offensive to both men and women in one fell swoop, which I can't really understand why. I think it's offensive to James in one fell swoop because he really doesn't like people that aren't heterosexual. That's in many ways one of the things that he can't quite get his head round. This concept that, some people are not James. Yes, but in terms of being banged up in jail or deported, I'd like to ask James, what African country, can you give me a concrete example of an African country where you'd be banged up or jailed for, mentioning, just saying you're English. Oh no, not that one. It's black fragility or anti-blackness. Yes. Just one example. That's all I'd be after, and then I'd be perfectly happy, because otherwise one might just think, you're basically making it up to kind of tie into that, isn't it dreadful that I as a white person have to experience so much racism in my everyday life, particularly, when I go after people in the NHS who are far more qualified than me, and in fact far more qualified than I'll ever be on all of those things that I present myself as an expert on. Anyway, that's James. Still, you're free to say whatever you like, unless of course James doesn't like it in terms of tying in with his white fragility. Yes. Moving on, the day prior to that, I've been provided with a recording of a meeting between the Crown Prosecution Service and an LGBT therapy group. Oh, being spied on again. Excellent. One attendee makes a joke about shooting Donald Trump's. The response? Laughter. Yeah, the meeting was to discuss hate crime. You couldn't make it up. Yes, indeed. Imagine someone making a joke in a, sort of place where they feel quite safe, where they can just, have free speech, and there's a laughter at the joke. That'd be awful, wouldn't it? Imagine somebody making a joke about Donald Trump. That's awful, isn't it? Yeah, that should be illegal, of course, because it's a free speech issue. How dare people privately, when they're pretty sure that some awful, awful human being like James Esses hasn't got his beady eye on them, dare to make a joke. And once again, it's that whole GB News thing about, well, there are no subjects you can't make jokes about, unless of course it's something that we don't want you to make a joke about, in which case you're just a bad person. Yes, but it's, free speech is dying. I can't understand why. Can you understand why free speech is dying? Definitely not. Yes, and here we go. Yeah, this is the particular same day. This is James. He decided he really didn't like this particularly black woman who's very well qualified. She's a doctor, James. You didn't quite manage to get as far as your masters, but leaving that one aside, not going to go there because I've gone there in the past. I'm not going to go there today. Yes, unbelievable. After having spotted racist content and coming in for a significant justified criticism, this psychologist simply says those who criticise aren't familiar with the concepts. Yes, indeed, James, because you see, you aren't familiar with an enormously large number of concepts because you never finished your course, right? Yeah, and yet you hold yourself up as an expert against those people who are, actual doctors in, those things that you couldn't get qualified in because, you had a few problems one way or another, But those of us that do understand, as I've said here many times before, things like medical sociology will fully understand in terms of the way that an awful lot of medicine and medical aspects of life are indeed racialised. There's an enormous amount of literature out there which I'm sure that you can't be bothered to read because why should you? After all, you know everything as a white bloke. Anyway, free speech. Not allowed to have opinions or ask people their particular views in and around research that you're doing because James might not like it. Better watch out. Better not post things up anywhere. You never know when he might spring out and say boo. Eh? Yes. And just to follow up from that one, slightly previously, I believe in free speech, but a senior public health practitioner forcing her clearly racist views on trainees and vulnerable patients alike should be struck off. Yeah, you see, you can hold any views you like, unless James doesn't agree with you, in which case you should be fired. But James, if you remember, was the victim because he was fired a couple of times from a few jobs in and around children. Those ones that he desperately wants to safeguard. And yet, of course, how he can take on board that kind of thing and decide that, he doesn't really care about other people's opinions because, after all, it's all about his. Anyway, astound me, these people. They astound me. Oh, I'm all for free speech. Okay, then I'm going to go over there and say things. No, you mustn't. No, you mustn't. That's awful, that is. I feel really threatened now. Oh, is that your fragility, is it? Yeah? Maybe you should go to some African country where you're not allowed to say you're English. Jesus. Anyway, I just thought I'd take you through that. Absolutely, laughingly sad in its own right. But there we go, there he is, of course. He'll still be there in a year's time, raking in the cash from his own personal woes. Can you imagine what it must be like? The noises of, dissonance in his head about all of those things that he doesn't know anything about whatsoever. And yet, magically, he is so much better qualified than everyone else to talk about them. Yeah, including me, obviously. Anyway, do have a beautiful Monday. Oh, time. The one thing you can't buy. Absolutely lovely. Better than wages.